we are going to get started. Alrighty, so let's try a proper greeting. Good morning, everyone. You can do better than that. Let's try that one more time. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I know, it's early. We made you go all the way to Southampton. I know. Anyway, on behalf of the entire team at the Bermuda Tourism Authority, it's my pleasure to welcome you and to extend a very Bermuda fall warm welcome to you for this, our fifth annual Tourism Summit. I'm delighted to have you all here. The BTA turned 5 years old this spring, and that seems like a milestone worth marking. While this year's air visitor numbers are not quite where we want them, although they are where we expected them to be, and we'll dissect that together shortly a bit later, it's worth reflecting on how far we've come together. Since 2015, leisure air visitor spending is up by 67%. Leisure air arrivals are up by almost half, 46% if you want to get technical about it, in case Cordell's in the room. And cruise arrivals are up by 28%. Those are statistics that we should all feel good about, not that we don't have a great deal of work left to do. And here's a factoid that you might be interested to learn as well. For every dollar that is spent on marketing by the BTA, we return $17 back to Bermuda in visitor spending. And tourism is generating 4 times in government revenue what we take today in a grant from the Bermuda government. So we feel pretty good that we are value for money these days. The theme of this year's Tourism Summit is the long view, and that's because this is the first anniversary of the National Tourism Plan, which is our collective blueprint for what lies ahead and how we're jointly going to tackle both the challenges and the opportunities that are on our horizon, not just this year, but for the next 5 years. So I'm sure everybody in the room remembers that the National Tourism Plan has 7 pillars. Does anyone remember what they spell out? There you go, agility, which we should have on a slide, I hope. Oh, I have the slides. Whoops, how about that? There we go. Does everyone remember what the A means? Well, okay, yeah, no, that's the headline, but what does it actually mean? There's a reason that we chose awareness and relevance. It's about sparking interest in Bermuda, so not simply marketing, but making Bermuda relevant to our target visitor segments in our focus and nurture cities. And there'll be a quiz later on whether or not you remember what those are. G was for greener, because we believe that being environmentally sustainable is important not only because our environment is our only natural asset, but also because we think it's good for business. I was for infrastructure, in which we were talking about investment, but less in the sense of bridges and tunnels, although I don't know where we'd put a tunnel in Bermuda, and more about all the things in the visitor experience that can create friction or ideally need to be seamless. L was for local involvement, because without Bermudians, there's no way we can achieve success. I, again, was for innovation, which was all about bringing a little bit of visitor-centric thinking and new ideas into our tourism economy. T was for teams and groups, and sports tourism in particular, as we look to grow out our non-summer business. And Y, of course, is for year-round, where we really think about our mission of embracing all 4 of Bermuda's distinct seasons, like Bermuda Fall. And more on that later, too. There we go. So agility is our roadmap for future planning. It encompasses all the elements we need to keep on top of every single day. And it's how we stay focused, even on days when things aren't going our way. It's also the thing that makes us really excited about coming to work every day, because what we see in our tourism future is something that we think we should all be excited about. So what we're going to do today is we're going to review a little bit of the past year, and dive into things a little bit, and we're going to look at the next. So we'll look at 2020, but with an eye to where we're going towards 2025. So we're going to start off with a look at the economic trends and how those may impact the tourism economy around the world, but specifically what it might mean for us right here at home. We're going to dig into the activities that have been happening over the last year to make progress on the National Tourism Plan and to highlight some of the accomplishments we've had jointly and where we still have work to do. We're going to do a deep dive into some hot topics. So we're going to talk about super yachts, frictionless travel, accessibility, teams and groups, and sports tourism, and vacation rentals. We're very pleased today to welcome Bravo, the new Vacation Rental Owners Association, who are here for their launch today as a new member of the acronym SOUP. And we'll be taking a sneak peek at some of the hotel projects that are on the horizon, because while we've all been quite rightly worried about what's happening at Caroline Bay, other projects are motoring ahead that are going to impact us in 2020 and 2021 in really exciting ways. And we're going to have a look at our new airport terminal, because this is the last time we're going to get together before that facility opens. So we'll have a look at what it's going to look like, and then we are going to talk with both the folks from Skyport as well as our air service development consultants about what the outlook for Bermuda's air service looks like and what the components of a sustainable air service development plan will look like. Toward the end of the day, we're going to bring it home. So we have some really accomplished Bermudians who are doing amazing things in the world of tourism and hospitality and tourism-related industries overseas. And they're going to talk to us about what they've learned by being away and what they have taken from Bermuda that they think is part of our secret sauce as well. At the end of the day, we are going to do the customary cocktails, but we're going to explore our innovative side by having a networking event that is co-hosted this year with our friends at the Bermuda Business Development Agency, who of course are hosting Tech Week this week. So they and their guests who are on island for that event will be joining us on the Great Lawn at the end of the day. So we hope you can stick around for that. Just a couple of housekeeping points before we get started. The nearest bathrooms are out through these doors and to the right. In the case of fire, run. Please tweet your hearts out. Wait a minute. Whoop. There we go. We had a little bit of confusion over what the appropriate Twitter hashtag was. Please use hashtag BTA Tourism Summit. That's the one that we're promoting this year. And then finally, we would invite you to visit the brilliant bars. So we have our friends from Google Destinations and TripAdvisors, and then the BTA team staffing a BTA Connect brilliant bar. We have actually a table set up for tourism entrepreneurs staffed by our experience team. And then we will shamelessly promote national service standards and try to get you to enroll in that as well. So it is now my privilege to welcome a man who really needs no introduction and who I usually rely upon to be the only other one in the room who is underdressed. Please join me in welcoming Bermuda's Minister of Tourism and Transport, the Honorable Zane Da Silva, JP, MP. Minister.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kevin. And as he quite rightly pointed out, we're probably the most known underdressed people in our fields, because he certainly doesn't like to. I don't like to wear ties that often. Kevin doesn't like to wear any clothes at all. But that being said, I'm delighted to open the 2019 edition of the Bermuda Tourism Summit. It's encouraging, very encouraging, to see such a diverse gathering of stakeholders here this morning. We have from the industry, government, entrepreneurial ventures coming together to brainstorm. I think it's awesome. You, I say you, are the key to the future of Bermuda's tourism industry. Your energy, your ideas, your vision will help us forge the way forward in sustainable, inclusive, progressive ways that benefit Bermuda and our Bermudian people. To those who are attending for the first time, thank you. And as former Premier Alex Scott always says, Bermuda works best when we work together. Collaboration is our competitive edge in tourism and everything else we do, and I know matters to all of you. Working in partnership is imperative. Our government, including my ministry, understand that, and that is why we act as a key partner alongside the BTA to help progress the National Tourism Plan. The government is an essential part of the puzzle, as all of you are, and each of us has a crucial role to play. We take that responsibility very seriously. And let me just highlight a few recent examples of the power of our partnership, ways in which the government has played a leading role to help Bermuda advance the goals of the National Tourism Plan. The first is groundbreaking work that the government carried out this summer to pave the way for a new sector that promises significant economic benefits to our island and our people. And I'm going to give you a warning. I'm going to say the S word: super yachts. The economic contribution of this industry through onshore spending and job creation are very clear. Importantly, it is also a sector that ties in neatly with one of our 4 target audiences identified by the BTA as representing the biggest potential for Bermuda's tourism growth. The tourism plan calls them jet setters. This summer, our government passed a landmark bill, the Super Yachts and Other Vessels Act. Among other provisions, it will allow boats 24 meters or larger to acquire transit, cruising, and charter permits, depending on the length of stay. It also waives the duty for Bermuda resident owners of these size yachts if they want to bring them here for less than 6 months. It's worth noting that part of the legislation also delivers tax relief to our local commercial boat operators, many of whom are here today. This legislative reform takes effect January 1st, and it really underscores the way that government can add practical value to the strategic plan. The legal framework that's being created is forward-looking and allows us to start competing as a bona fide cruising and chartering destination. I took the opportunity to promote Bermuda in this sphere by speaking to super yacht owners, captains, and brokers at the recent Monaco Yacht Show. Again, it was Team Bermuda in action with government, private industry, and public-private agencies working side by side to achieve a national win, and we look forward to seeing Bermuda reap the benefits. Another example of the government's commitment to tourism priorities will be on full display up the country at the end of the month. And I'm talking about Port Royal Golf Course, where the prestigious PGA Tour Bermuda Championship starts on October 31st. Now that's also Halloween, so if you all want to wear your Halloween suits when you go up to watch the start, or feel free. Or if you want to wear a Liverpool shirt, Steve, you can do that. The government has teamed up with the BTA, the PGA Tour, and operators, the Bruno Events folks, to bring this world-class tournament to Bermuda and make it a multi-year success. Again, it aligns with one of the missions set out in the National Tourism Plan to attract key sports relevant to Bermuda, and golf is one of them. Being able to leverage this top-rated public golf course as the staging ground for a championship that will capture the world's attention is something we are very, very proud of. Hosting this historic tournament here in Bermuda also gives 4 of our Bermudian golfers the opportunity of a lifetime. And I think I should repeat that. Hosting this historic tournament here in Bermuda also gives 4 of our Bermudian golfers the opportunity of a lifetime. We have a Bermudian-only qualifier this week, which again is historic. Never ever been held for a PGA Tour event where you have a qualifier for that country's people only. This will see 18 Bermudians, 13 pros, and 5 amateurs compete for 3 spots. And I say 3 out of the 4 because Dwayne Pearman, our longtime ambassador and past champion in just about every golf tournament we've ever had in Bermuda, will get an automatic spot. A final example of the value that government can bring to the tourism table revolve around the transport and infrastructure reform. As you know, my ministry has ambitious goals to improve our island's transportation network, and we set those out in the green paper that was tabled in Parliament this past spring. Today's summit also represents a robust example of the synergy I'm talking about, bringing together the combined energy and talents of the government, small and large businesses, of public-private agencies, of individuals, and global thought leaders across demographics for the good of Bermuda tourism. I thank you all, and a special thank you to all those in the BTA for hosting today's event. Our economy is expanding, and our government encourages you to explore new opportunities created by some of the collaborative innovations. With that said, I wish you all an inspiring and productive conference, and I look forward to working with all of you to take tourism into new heights. Thank you very much. Now, I have to apologize, but Cabinet does call, so I do have to race. If we can get the business done early, I will be back, but you all know what it's like when you get 11 people in the room. It's like having 11 lawyers in the room. You get 11 different opinions. So thank you very much. Enjoy Kevin's dress. I don't know how long he's going to keep his tie on, but all of you have a great day.
I did almost introduce Tay as the annual event where I wear a jacket, but still. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker. Many of you will remember Adam Sachs. He has been with us many times in years past, and always one of the highest rated sessions of the day, out of which I take no personal offense. Adam is the president of Tourism Economics, an analytically based consulting company dedicated to the tourism sector. Over the last 20 years, he has worked with hundreds of organizations like ours, but also state governments, national governments, hotel chains, hotel investors, really pretty much everyone. He is the expert in tourism forecasting and measurement. He is also a compelling and sought-after speaker, which really makes him the perfect person to give us the outlook for the tourism economy in 2020. Please welcome Adam Sachs.
Good morning. I can remember 5 years ago, the first BTA Summit, and I was with you then, and I had known Vic Isley for years through her time with Destinations International and the Washington, D.C. Visitors Bureau, and Vic invited me to come, and so I began to study Bermuda, and my overarching impression was, we've got some work to do here. Looking at the data, looking at the history, looking at the competitive situation, it really was very clear that you had a hill to climb. And what's been really encouraging to see over these last 5 years is truly how far you have come. Each year, as I've been invited back, I've delved into the data again, and each year I've come away with the same conclusion that indeed you have turned this ship around. And one of the things that we do around the world regularly is advise and assist destinations who are in some situation where they're evaluating what they're going to do in the space of marketing their destination. And usually it's in one of two situations. One of the situations is that they're underfunded for destination marketing, and they know it. And they're seeing the negative effects, and they need to find funding, whether it be from the private sector or the public sector or a partnership. So one is underfunding. The other is when funding is under attack, and that's when an established destination marketing organization comes under fire. Either through budget constraints or simply through opposition otherwise, and budgets are being threatened. In both those situations, one of the things that we do, in addition to looking at the value of destination marketing for that destination, is we look at globally, what are best practices? Where have we seen destination marketing make a difference? And one of the best practices that I have the ability to reference, because of what you've accomplished over these last 5 years, is Bermuda. Because very much as a function of the work that you've done in positioning Bermuda in new ways, and branding it in new ways, and using new marketing channels, in innovation and destination marketing, you have changed the entire narrative of Bermuda. And so I unapologetically can use Bermuda as a case study of how to do it right, how to change it. And it's a warning sign for those destinations that are considering cutting their destination marketing funding. And it's a compelling case study for those that are considering increasing it. So thank you for being that. I know that's not why you did it, but it is one of the benefits, and I think it does at least put into context what you have accomplished over these last 5 years. What I'm going to jump in with is to try to give you a big view of where we see travel right now and where we think it's going within the context, particularly of what's going on in the global economy. And there are a lot of things that we can be worried about right now as we think about the state of the economy, right? We only need to open up the news to see all the things that we might be worried about. But fundamentally, this is the issue, is that the global economy is slowing down. All right, so whatever the news headlines are, it mostly relates to this issue. And so when I look at GDP around the world, or Purchasing Managers' indices, which kind of tells us where things are going, we see the same thing. Things are slowing down. And when you go around different parts of the world, you see the pockets of this slowing. Eurozone, Germany, in particular, who contracted last quarter. Brazil's in recession. Mexico is stalled out. Even China and India's economies are slowing down. And so globally, after growing about 3.2% GDP last year, we expect GDP in the world to only grow about 2.5% this year. So that's the situation we're in. And of course, a slowing economy is a more vulnerable economy to shocks, and so this is indeed the concern. And the biggest external shock, if you will, has been in the space of trade, and particularly the trade war and how that has affected trade. What you see here is world trade growth, 3-month moving average, just to smooth that out. And you can see that no matter what indicator we're looking at, it's not really important to dive into the individuals, but just to clearly show you that trade, that is countries trading, importing and exporting around the world, has slowed down and indeed just about flatlined in terms of growth year over year. And that global picture, that global slowing, has pulled the U.S. into that wake of a slowing global economy. And so you see, particularly in manufacturing, the U.S. kind of following after growing really fast in 2017 and 2018, U.S. manufacturing starting to slow in line with what's going on in the world. And indeed, the trade war is a big part of it. All right, beyond the politics and the negotiations and the everyday tweets about what's going on in the trade war, this is what's really happening. Actually, trade between the U.S. and China has fallen. Exports to China from the U.S. have fallen about 30% in recent months. So you better believe that actually China's pretty motivated to work out a deal. Of course, the U.S. is pretty motivated to work out a deal as well, as imports from China have also fallen about 20%. So these are having real effects on companies who are making things and trading things, and that is a big part of why the global economy has slowed down. What's fascinating is that in the Caribbean, we've really seen none of the effects of this slowing global economy in 2019 year to date. Actually, 2019 year to date, stopover visits to the Caribbean region, and I'm including Bermuda in that, have grown nearly 8%. Right? And that's through maybe the first 6-7 months of the year that we have data for all Caribbean countries. Now, it comes off a very abysmal 2018, following off of hurricane damage in key islands, but nevertheless, 2019 is shaping up to be very, very good, even while the global economy is slowing. Now, how worried should we be, right? Is this just continuing to slow? Well, I think one of the things that we have noted as we study the U.S. economy is that it does have a certain sturdiness to it, in addition to it being slow. And that sturdiness, I think, is notable for a number of reasons. First, we can, I think, sit back and take some encouragement that the U.S. economy has actually grown. This is the longest expansion in U.S. economic history that is going on right now. 123 months and counting. At no point in recorded economic history in the U.S. has the economy of the U.S. grown for this long without going into recession. All right. Now, before we get too excited, we also should note that it's been one of the slowest economic expansions on record, growing on average GDP about 2.3%. So we'll take how long it's been going without a downturn, but it hasn't been setting the world on fire as far as how fast it's been going over this period of time. And the U.S., I think where we see the biggest area of concern is in manufacturing. And I pointed that out earlier. It relates to trade, relates to the global environment. But this is the Institute for Supply Management new orders indicator. And it's a great indicator of kind of where things are going. And as we see that head towards zero, we see kind of a weakness in the manufacturing sector. However, it is not contracting as yet. It has just stopped growing. But investment has tapered. And so the strong investment that we saw in corporations in 2018 has leveled off. And so we're seeing now companies begin to change the behavior and how they're investing. What's interesting is the blue line there is this percentage of CEOs who are planning higher capital spend in the next 6 months. And that's come down a good bit in recent months. But it still stands at 40%, which is above the long-term average. So we don't see CEOs of American companies pushing the panic button right now. In fact, they're still planning and investing for the future, just not at the same level that they were a year ago. The NFIB Small Business Optimism Index is another great way to look at kind of how are companies in the U.S. feeling right now. We see clearly companies are not quite as optimistic as they were 6 months ago, looking particularly at that red line. However, well above where it's been over the last 10 years. So again, we can read today's news and feel like, oh my goodness, right? But if you look at some of the underlying data and the way that Main Street corporations are behaving and the way that they're planning, you actually don't see the bottom falling out right now. One of the reasons for that is that corporate profits remain very, very, very high. Companies are making a lot of money still. And even as corporate profits have come down, and there's going to be, of course, a valuation relative to expectations, companies, as a share of GDP, are making a lot of cash right now. Some 12% as a share of GDP in corporate profits in the most recent quarter. And look where that is compared to the share of GDP historically, virtually at record highs. Where we see the greatest sturdiness, though, is not in the corporate sector. In fact, it's in the consumer sector, and that is good news indeed for Bermuda because these are where our travelers are. And wages have paced at 3%, actually the most recent month, 2.9%, but roughly 3% now for 13, 14 months now. And you can see that acceleration in the pace of wage growth. This is what we've been waiting for. 2 years ago, when we were in 2017, the narrative that I was sharing time after time in my presentations was, look, yeah, I know wages are only growing at like 2.5%, but they're going to grow faster. They have to grow faster because unemployment rate is below 4%. It's now at 3.7%. And in a tight labor market like that, wages must grow because of the competition for talent and the need to retain talent. And in that tight job market, indeed, that's exactly what we've seen over the last year, with wage growth accelerating to 3%. So that bodes very well for the purchasing power of travelers. And so it's not surprising that consumers are pretty happy. Right? Consumer confidence remains really elevated among U.S. households. Of course, you see the dip, particularly as relate to some of the noise about the trade wars. You can see other issues kind of affecting the ups and downs. But if you look at the 10-year period, and in fact, if you completely just came out of hibernation for say you didn't look at anything for the last 2 years in terms of economic indicators, and this was the only chart that I showed you with nothing else, you'd say, we're doing pretty well, right? Consumers are very happy and wages are growing. What are we all worried about? Well, there's plenty. But the point is that on this front, we're actually seeing a pretty good picture on the state of consumers. And why are they happy? Well, we already pointed out one reason. Their incomes are rising. But also their assets are increasing in value. And household net wealth is now 50% above its pre-recession high. And if I was with you in 2009 or 2010, and I showed you this is our forecast of asset prices, you would think I was a very optimistic economist indeed. But in fact, this is exactly what's happened, and this is the state of balance sheets on the asset side. But on the liability side, households are also in a very, very good position. This is household financial obligations as a share of disposable income. Households are bearing less in terms of debt service costs now than they have since 1980, right? Only about 15% of annual disposable income is going toward the service of these financial obligations. And that is a function of deleveraging, paying off debt. That is also a function of low interest rates. And those two things have freed up disposable income for things like travel. And indeed, that's what we've seen in terms of the US travel market. So we see it there on the liability side. And we also see it in terms of the savings rate. Households are actually saving money. Like, this is an incredible concept, right? US households now saving some 8% of their income. So in terms of the ability to weather a storm, if it were to come, US households are in a much better position in terms of their balance sheets than they were a decade ago. And so what this leads us to is the very unexciting conclusion is that we expect the US economy to not only slow this year, but to slow further into next year. One of the reasons that it will inevitably slow is because the benefits of tax reform, that is tax cuts, and the spending bill that boosted growth in 2018 and 2019 just won't be there on a comp basis in 2020. So you just remove those effects and you see a slower economy in 2020. But you add to that what's going on in the global economy, and you see almost inevitably that the US economy is going to slow down in 2020. All right, so this is the environment that we're marketing in. And so if you wanted to know kind of how is this all shaking out, well, you could kind of put it in, if you put the whole US economy on a balance sheet, this is the way that I would organize it. On the asset side, you have all these good things: rising wages, low unemployment, high consumer confidence, solid household finances. I'd add solid corporate profits. But on the liability side of the balance sheet, the things that we need to be concerned about would be that slowing growth, particularly global economic weakness, the effects of the trade war, and financial market turmoil that we're seeing day after day. All right? So this is the question that everyone's asking, and perhaps in some way you've asked in the past week. Are we headed for a recession? Right? When you look at all this, or is this where this is headed? Right? Longest expansion on record, surely we must be due. Well, one of the reasons that people are so concerned about a potential recession is that the yield curve has inverted. It was called the crazy inverted yield curve recently, and that was done via tweet in all caps by the US president. And so I've commandeered that quote here. Sure, we'll call it that. And what's notable is that both the 10-year minus the 2-year and the 10-year minus the 3-month have inverted. The greatest concern was that 10-year minus 2-year, because that's the one that has been predictive of recessions historically, and that is currently not inverted, but it was briefly. So why shouldn't I totally freak out about this? Right? Why shouldn't we pretend like there is a fire and run? Well, a few reasons. The first is that the lag between an inverted yield curve and a recession over the last 30 years has actually averaged 2 years. All right? So why would we completely change our marketing strategy and our mindset because of something that would happen 2 years from now? Right? That's a third of the way through your 6-year strategic plan. Right? So it can be up to 3 years historically. So it's not a canary in a coal mine that's like, oh no, here we go, this is happening. Right? That's the first reason. The second is that one of the reasons that the yield curve did invert is because of a unique global financial situation in which yields globally in other developed economies that would be considered stable have been either at zero or even negative in parts of Europe. And so what that has done is has driven up demand for US treasuries to find any kind of yield whatsoever. And as demand for U.S. Treasuries has gone up, the price for those Treasuries has gone up, which means that the yield on those long-term Treasuries has gone down, right? Basic economics, as the yield on those long-term Treasuries has gone down, simply by virtue of comparison with the short-term, the yield curve inverted. So that global environment is one of the things that is at work here. And then the other thing is that the Fed has already, and we believe will continue to lower rates on the short end of the yield curve. We expect 2 more cuts before this year is over, right? And so that's gonna help to right-size things moving forward. And then, of course, that consumer being in a place of strength. When we look at past recessions, we see a vulnerability in the consumer market that kind of comes before that period of recession. We certainly don't see that now. So it's one of the reasons we're not calling for that recession right now, even though there is a possibility indeed. In fact, if you want to know kind of how our economists at Oxford Economics, my parent company, how they're viewing this as we advise our clients, we think the probability of a U.S. recession next year is at about 40%. Now, that may be uncomfortably high, but it is not the most likely scenario. The most likely scenario is that one that I painted earlier, which is that the U.S. economy slows. Okay, so what does this mean for us? What does this mean for the travel sector? Well, a few thoughts on that. First is to point out that occupancy rates in Bermuda are at recent history highs right now, year to date at about 65% occupancy. And that positions Bermuda, if there were a slowdown, to weather that storm better than it would have certainly a decade ago when occupancy rates were lower. And so that does position Bermuda in a place of strength. And indeed, as Kevin mentioned earlier, the stopover market has just made up significant ground. If I compare it to Caribbean comp set, where I remove a few destinations you're just not competing with, what you clearly see in the pink bars, is that Bermuda, starting really in 2015, something changed, right? And you began to not only grow, but began to make up ground on the region. And so even with 2019 being a year where you've given up a little bit of ground simply because of air service, and there's really nothing you can do about that in the near term, right? These ups and downs in air service are going to happen. You've still, I mean, year to date over 2017 on the leisure market, you're up about 9% through August. Right? So if you take the 2-year between 17 and 19 on the leisure air side, you're still significantly up, even with that slowdown in 2019. But the big picture is that over the last 5 years, you've made up for lost time in terms of your competitiveness with the region. And of course, the cruise market has just gone from strength to strength, up, I believe, 11% this year. If you look at just the summer months where you're trying to fill in the strategic plan and in shoulder season, you're up 22% in those months. And so that has indeed been part of the success story of Bermuda. When it comes down to it, though, we're really interested in spending, right? It's not just people. This is an economic objective, fundamentally. And when I look at that, what I've done is I've indexed, just set both my Caribbean comp group and Bermuda, set them at 100 in 2014. Right? And then let them go from there to see how fast each has grown in terms of visitor spending in their economies. Well, since 2014, visitor spending, we track it at up about 52% over this period of time, compared to the comp set in the Caribbean at just 16%. So indeed, where it matters most in terms of dollars, Bermuda has well exceeded its competition over this period of time. And this has produced dividends for the Bermuda economy. This is work that we do for the World Travel and Tourism Council each year, tracking tourism share of the Bermuda economy. We do this for 190 countries around the world, and you can find it on WTTC's website. I've just pulled out the total economic impact of all travel and tourism in terms of GDP and in terms of employment. And while those shares certainly clearly indicate how important this industry is to the Bermuda economy, 21% of employment, 18% of GDP, and this includes indirect effects, as induced effects, it includes capital investment. I think the key thing here is to see how this share has grown. So since 2015, the importance as a share of the Bermuda economy of tourism has increased. And so, the investments are making a difference, and they're actually driving economic growth across Bermuda as it increases its share of the economy. So your theme for this morning is the long view, and I had prepared these remarks before I carefully looked at the program to see that that was your theme. But the final thoughts that I want to share with you are exactly that, on what does the long view look like. On Brexit, right, there are real concerns here, right? It's hurting the UK outbound, but this is where I see a really remarkable kind of counter performance, because Bermuda this year, actually UK arrivals are up, right? So even with the slowdown that we see in the UK in terms of business investment and economic growth and how that's affecting the rest of Europe, the UK is actually up, but Europe has softened along with that. We see it in the labor market. So while the US economy is slowing, we see the same in Europe, and these are the headwinds that indeed you are facing. The consumer in Europe, consumer expectations, this is the red line here. You can see that expectations over the next 12 months are for continued slowing. So there's a theme here. It's that the environment in 2020 is actually going to be more challenging in terms of the economic fundamentals as we move forward. Part of the reason for that is the strength of the dollar, particularly as we look to Europe for visitors. Bermuda is going to be relatively more expensive as they exchange currency. But as we move forward, I actually expect the dollar to weaken, right? So the current levels, as we forecast out, appear to be at their highs. So that purchasing power will begin to reverse. Bermuda will become less expensive as we move forward into the longer term outlook. So where do we think things are headed? Well, first, as we look at leading indicators of travel in the U.S., one of the things that I look at is bookings of air travel. This is really interesting information from the Airline Reporting Corporation. What it tells us is, how are Americans booking their travel for the next 3 months and for the next 6 months out, and how's that pacing compared to a year ago? And what we've seen in every month of 2019, all the way through August, is that bookings for air travel, for future travel over the next 3 and 6 months, is pacing about 6% above last year. Right? So we are not at all seeing the traveler begin to take their foot off the brakes. In fact, we're seeing, if you look at the last 4 months, acceleration in booking air travel for the next 3 and 6 months moving forward. So very, very encouraging is that even though we're seeing some of these shaky parts of the economy, the consumer, in terms of their travel intentions and their travel bookings, seems to be completely unaffected and actually accelerating into the near term. We see the same thing from the Conference Board, who asks in a large survey of U.S. households, do you plan to take a vacation in the next 6 months? And the percentage of households who have said yes to that has increased in every month of 2019 relative to each of the previous 2 years. So again, there, we're seeing the U.S. leisure traveler continue to look forward and with intentions to travel more than they did last year. So here are final thoughts, and this is truly the long view. What we're part of right now is, in the travel industry, is something of an Uber trend. And that is simply that people are traveling more and more than they ever have before. Just looking back to 2000, you can see this is international departures per capita in the UK, Canada, and the US. Your 3 top markets. And you can see that people are traveling internationally more and more and more. And this is, I can go back, I could have taken this back to 1980, and you would see the rise over even a longer period of time. But in a sense, Bermuda just is simply riding this wave, and the strategy that you've put in place over the next 5-6 years is simply to take advantage of this growing pie. And so the long view is that there is a growing traveler market, because people are traveling internationally more and more. And this is the long-run trend. We see it, if I go back to 1980, in this context, that U.S. households spending on lodging, we'll take that as a proxy for vacations because this is consumer spending, it's increased 271% since 1980. Now that sounds like a lot. Is it a lot? Well, yeah, it's a lot because that's 3 times the pace of GDP growth over that same period of time. So the pace of way that Americans are spending their money on lodging as a proxy for travel is growing at about 3 times the pace of the overall U.S. economy. And so that trend represents continued opportunity for Bermuda. Another reason that we're encouraged in the long view is that Americans are, or the way we would put it, is they're regaining their sanity. So last year, Americans left 668 million vacation days on the table. They were allotted paid time off, and they didn't use it. Right? If that's not a definition of insanity, I don't know what it is. And I say that, knowing that I'm personally in these numbers, and I'm doing everything I can to get out of these numbers and get my staff out of these numbers as well. But what's encouraging is that if you look at the long run, through the 70s, 80s, 90s, people were taking pretty much the same amount of vacation every year, about 20 days. And then what began to happen, we saw in the beginning of the 2000s, and it really bottomed out during the Great Recession, is that people began to change their behavior, stop taking all their vacation time. And around 2015, though, things began to turn. And part of this was the travel industry beginning to message out that you need to take your stinking vacation because you've earned it and because life is too short. And you may have seen some of these advertisements with children guilting their parents into taking their vacation time. And this has been absolutely a wide effort across the travel industry with hotels and credit card companies and rental car companies and destination marketing organizations beginning to message out the importance of vacation time and getting psychologists involved and sociologists, and the messaging began to become pretty broad. And what we've seen is a recovery in the last few years where people are taking more and more of their vacation time, now up to about 17.4 from its previous low of 16. And so this is a very encouraging sign, but it also, to me, shows that there is more opportunity in the long run. Because if we continue to see that blue line come up, and you're looking at the potential of another 768 million days of available travel time being actually put into the market. And that's what you have the opportunity to tap into. Another reason we're encouraged in the long run is that incomes are rising, and particularly in what we would say would be the creation of high income households. We'll set that for now at $100,000, and this is the number of households, the new households that we're expecting to present themselves over the next decade that earn more than $100,000. 10 million new households expected over the next 10 years in the U.S. who will make $100,000 that didn't make $100,000 before. China, another 7.6 million households. The UK, another 2.1 million households. This has an exponential or a compounding effect on travel because you're not simply marketing to the same people that you were marketing to last year. You're marketing to people that now have the means to travel in a way they didn't have the means to travel last year. And so in that sense, the pie is growing even as you are seeking to increase your share of it. So let's end this. I'll share some takeaways here. Yes, the global economy is slowing and the U.S. economy with it, but there is a fundamental strength to the U.S. economy right now, particularly on the consumer market as we look at incomes and assets and liabilities and confidence. We would say it's right to be on a recession watch right now, but it's premature to make a recession call and say that is the most likely scenario. The Bermuda tourism industry has experienced a turnaround, and you're to be congratulated for that. And that would, if there is a slowdown in the traveler market, that would mirror the economic slowdown. You're in a better position to weather that than certainly you would have been 6-7 years ago. But this is where we do take heart, is that the leading indicators of travel are still very, very strong. And over the next 3 and 6 months, expectations are for travel to continue on an outbound basis. And indeed, when we take the long view, the opportunity for Bermuda tourism remains very, very good. Thank you so much for having me again this morning.
Thank you, Adam. That was great. Fingers crossed for Bermuda to keep riding that wave and for more American vacations. We have a slight change in our schedule just to try and play a bit of catch up with time. So we're going to skip the break, if that's okay with everyone, and move right on to our first general session here. I'm, excuse me, I'm Rosemary Jones, Director of Corporate Communications and Strategy for the BTA. Welcome to our summit today. It's my pleasure to introduce the first session, our National Tourism Plan Year 1. 1 year into our 6-year plan, it's time to start looking through changes in the tourism picture and adjust accordingly. So right now, we're going to look at the plan's strategic goals, including success indicators. Then we'll follow up with a fast-paced roundtable session with our executive team, who'll discuss, we're going to look at our executive team, and they're going to look ahead to some of the, as well as looking at our accomplishments, we're going to look ahead to some of our wish list items that we want to accomplish in the next year. So to start things off, I'd like to introduce Kimberly Orton, Managing Director of Red Sky Strategy in New York, who worked with us on the National Tourism Plan that looks ahead to 2025. Red Sky Strategy is a consultancy focused on helping clients focus to achieve stronger growth and higher returns on their investments. They worked with the BTA and our stakeholders and the whole community to develop this 6-year strategic plan. And Kimberly is going to guide us through some key performance indicators this morning. So I'd like to welcome Kimberly up here to kick off this session.
There's a huge step as you come up there, so we're all kind of gingerly approaching it. Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. So I'm here to really sort of take you through, I feel like the principle, the report card of where we are, where we've gone through in the strategic plan. And a little over a year ago, we presented the plan and participated with others, and I talked to you a little bit about Bermuda having the culture of no, if you'll remember. I'm here to say that I think we've turned that around a little bit, and now I can say that Bermuda has the culture of go. So we're working towards that. A lot of people say, why are we even taking time to think about, where we're standing, and why are we sort of grading ourselves at this point? But there's a couple of reasons why. It's a good time, I think, to really think about where have we come for a year? What are some of the accomplishments? What has worked? What do we need to sort of adjust? We need to think about economic changes. You heard Adam talk a lot about what's happening, what's trending. So now is a great time for us to pause and say, do we need to reevaluate the plan? Do we need to think differently about the plan? And do we need to course correct the plan? We need to allow for organic changes. When you do a plan like this that's 5-6 years down the road, things change, the economy, the players, even things within the environment change, and we need to course correct accordingly. We want to monitor our success and see where performance is lagging or where it's growing, and what do we need to do differently. And I think that's very transparent to kind of say, here's where we are, and here's what we want to do going forward to 2020. It's really taking the long view, which I think is an exciting way to think about the plan, because so often plans get written, they get put on a shelf, and no one picks them up again. And what we want to try and do is make sure that this is organic and living and breathing, and that we are following a plan, and that it's the blueprint, as Kevin said, really the roadmap to making sure that at the end, in 6 years, we're where we want to be as a travel destination. And that's really, I think the piece that you'll see after I'm done sort of taking you through the report card is to say, what is the outlook for 2020? What are some of the things that the team is working on to move forward, and what are they kind of doing? And I think that's great. So Kevin reminded you about this, about agility, and I put it up here just because I think the interesting thing is that I think when the last plan was written, no one could a year later say what were sort of those pillars and what were we working against. And I've never seen a plan be more so activated than this agility, and seeing Bermuda really rise to that challenge and really start to embrace all the things that the plan had. So we had the awareness and the greener, a lot of local involvement, teams and groups year-round, and infrastructure as well as innovation. So really just looking at all those pieces of the plan, I wanted to remind everyone of that. And what all that landed us with was over 50 strategies. So that's a lot of things that had to be done, a lot of directions that were sort of put forth in the plan, and close to well over 100 of those tactics, those individual activities that we're going to sort of be built upon. So this is just a look at a very short period of time, not the long game, but certainly looking at where we are right now. So I want to put a reminder here, because we've talked a little bit about this, but this is the early days of a 6-year plan. This is something that's just taking a little glance in time. Some activities will not build, right away. It'll take some time for them to build and certainly become more effective over time. And some activities, such as cruise ships, for example, those are locked and loaded by contracts, so maybe those don't change right away in the first year of a plan. And the plan does not take into account things like hurricanes, right? Whether they do lots of damage or not, or whether the public is panicked about them or not. But, that's not something that we can build into a 6-year plan. So those are just sort of my caveats, remembering of where we are and how we've gotten here. So you remember this page? This was the page that really kind of summed up everything. This is where we were going to measure and judge ourselves and sort of say, here's the 6 things that we're going to do, or 7, the things that we're going to really measure as we go forward. The first one being our GDP and how much tourism was going to add to that. Really talking about getting tourists to come, increasing our air visitors, and then really thinking about increasing visitors coming for our Bermuda fall and for other periods of time beyond the summer. Really tapping into African American visitors, and then worrying about satisfaction for both tourists that come and say to someone else to come back to Bermuda, and also for our community at large to be really excited about tourism. So remember, those were sort of the goals that we set out for the 2025 plan. So how are we doing against that so far? And the first one on the GDP, and on the second one on our growth of summer. So I have to sort of say to you, when you look at this chart, GDP numbers are not here yet. There's some new classifications that are happening, so GDP is not done. However, this is sort of looking at half the year through 2019, and it's very much half the year. We're almost through the third quarter, and September numbers are not done. But this is looking at the picture, and I don't think this is surprising based on, what you heard from Adam in terms of, leisure air travel is down, but so is air capacity. So those are sort of locked and loaded hand in hand. If you look at our leisure air arrivals, the US is down, but Canada and the UK are up slightly. So we're sort of seeing an improvement picture there. But our cruise arrivals are up by 15%. So something there in terms of some good news of balancing that out. And as we continue to work towards this is just what the picture looked like through the second quarter. And I can say that just looking at some initial numbers, it's much the same for the third quarter. And overall, our leisure spending is up about 1.4%. So not a huge number, but it's growing. So a little bit of a mixed picture, but where we expected, and remember very much the short term, and not sort of looking at the long. I think someone said to me, it's like taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back, not 3 steps back, but just 1, but just looking at terms of what do we have to do as we go forward and adjust our plan. When we look at sort of our visitors, because one of our second, success indicators, or one of our measurements was, trying to get those air visitors for at least 30% of our summer arrivals. And this is an eye chart, I know, so follow with me. So when we started tracking this in 2016 and 2017, we were at about 25%, and our goal was 30%. From 2018 to 2019, we're at about 26%. So we're right on target in terms of that number going through. And you can't see my orange line, it's hard to see, but we've sort of just got that number captured through August. So we are on track to sort of level out at about 26% for the year. So moving that number forward and getting close to our 2025 goal of 30%. In terms of our next indicator that we were sort of measuring, which is really this 56% of our arrivals coming from the non-summer months for that May to September period, or, that we were trying to capture when we're getting people not to be here just in the summer, but in those other months, in our Bermuda fall, as we call it, our Bermuda winter. And that was really about balance, if you remember, that we were talking about. And that number is, we're doing fairly well on that goal. Our goal was 56% would come in the non-summer months, and in 2018, right now, we're at about 55%. In 2019, we're right on target. We're about 55%. So very close to the goal there. So a lot of work that's been done to sort of come up with great experiences, and all of you in the room, have been part of that, is building activities in those non-summer months. So this is, I think, a good outlook as we go forward. The next one was really interesting, and the next goal was really about, I think, inclusion and really tapping into some of the trends. And that was that African Americans were traveling at a record high and spending lots of money, and we wanted to get our share of African American visitors coming to the island. And it was interesting because so many African American visitors are looking for things such as culture and food and history, all of which Bermuda has, and we have a strong link to African American visitors from the U.S. So this was really one of the drivers that we were working towards. And this is one that we have not moved a whole lot. As of right now, we're still at about 4%. The goal is 8%. And this is one of those I think is definitely for the long haul in terms of really putting some programs in place. We saw a lot of programs even in this past week that were really driving some tourists. So I think this is one that we will continue to push and grow, and some of those activities will just really start to lock in as we go forward in the plan. The next one was about sort of this idea of satisfaction, and I think these are really strong indicators to me, because this is not only about whether visitors are excited about talking about Bermuda and coming back to Bermuda and sharing that information with friends and family, but also whether or not our community supports tourism and is excited about it. So these are some key drivers, and one of them was that 83% of our visitors would recommend it to family and friends. And we'll say where we are, which is a really good number. So our benchmark was 76% when we sort of started this study, and year to date we're at 78%. And our benchmark is 82, and our goal is 75, or 82 is from air and 75 is from cruise. So we're doing really well in terms of this number and on trend to do this well. I think we'd set a goal of about 77% to sort of make sure that by 2025 we continue to grow this satisfaction number. So at 78%, we're doing fantastic. So that is good news. So those are people who are excited that they came and are willing to tell friends and family that it's a great place to visit and that they're interested in coming back. So that's a great number for the future. The last number for us really was the satisfaction of our community, and I think that's key too, because that says that beyond this room, everyone on the island is supporting tourism and is excited about tourism and understands what it does for all of us here. And that number that we sort of set for ourselves, that goal is 70%. So 70% of our Bermuda residents will be excited and supportive of tourism. And currently we're at about 61%. So the benchmark is 61. We are at 68% year to date, which is fantastic, with a goal of 70%. So we're closing in on that number, which I think just speaks really well to the fact that we've turned from that culture of no to the culture of go, and people being excited and supportive of let's move this forward. So I think that that's really a great number to put on the chart. So when I look at this, I think it's a little bit of a mixed picture, and I think it's where I would think a plan would be, a year in, or almost a year and not quite a year in terms of really going through. We're still waiting on some numbers for our GDP and our number one goal at 30%, and worrying about balance between the 30 and the 56%. Moving forward on some of those. Some of those are right at level places. And really trying to increase the people that come to it and the overall satisfaction. So I think those are just sort of a mixed bag, but in a lot of ways, good numbers that we're moving forward as we go into the plan. So overall, I think the report card's not bad. Pretty positive in terms of let's keep going. We've got some challenges, as you heard from Adam, but I think we're weathering that as best we can. And, one of the things I do want to share with you, which is exciting news, is that the fact that the plan is really getting into the community. People are working towards it. People remember the acronym. People are thinking about it. People are, as we say, living the brand, not just the BTA, but all over the community. There's been a lot. And because of that, I do have some happy news to report, and that is that the National Tourism Plan, the 2025 plan, is a finalist in the National Place Brand of the Year. And this is an award that's given to a place, a DMO, that has built a plan. The plan had to be built within the last 15 months. It had to be built from the ground. It had to involve the community, the government, the BTA, or like a BTA-like organization. It had to have all those things that this plan really does. And I think that it's worth giving a big round of applause because this plan is now one of the finalists, and the award will be announced in November in London. So keeping our fingers crossed, but until that point, I think it's a great accomplishment to have made it to the finalists. So big hand for all of you. So we'll keep thinking good, positive things, but that just says that the plan has done all those pieces and been recognized for pulling pieces together and people working hard, yourselves included, and having spoken to so many of you in the room and so many people not here today, I know that a lot of work and heart went into the plan. So we're just going to keep going and moving forward. So I'm excited to turn it over to the next section, which I think is going to be a panel discussion about the future and looking at 2020 and really taking the long view. So I'll hand it over to everyone else. Thank you.
Getting my stair workout. So I'd like to introduce our executive team now for this discussion. So to my left, Kevin Dallas, our CEO, Glenn Jones, our Chief Experience Development Officer, Carla Lacey, BTA Chief Operating Officer, Erin Smith, our new Chief Technology Officer, and Victoria Isley, Chief Sales and Marketing Officer for the BTA in New York. Welcome.
Morning.
So we'd like to give you a little snapshot of some of the key accomplishments to date in the context of the National Tourism Plan's 5 strategic priorities. So we're just going to recap what those are. Number 1, deliver balanced growth, geographic focus, and seasonal spread. Number 2, focus on must-win segments like experience enthusiast, adventure seeker, jet setter, and also nurture active families. Number 3, make Bermuda easier to experience. Number 4, empower Bermudians to participate in the tourism economy. And number 5, motivate stakeholders to engage and act on our National Tourism Plan. So Vic, just to kick it off, for number 1, delivering balanced growth across geography and seasons of the year, let's look at awareness and relevance, A, in our agility plan. How has our marketing strategy zeroed in on focus cities to date, and how is this reflected in our resulting media coverage and visitor statistics? Talk about nurture cities as well.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So everyone knows our key feeder markets, New York, Philadelphia, Boston, DC, and Toronto. So the entire team really has an always-on mentality for those markets. What that means is we're always on in digital marketing and social media. We're active every day in the PR and earned media front. On travel trade professional education, the team is working on that day in and day out. And then also on the teams and groups, the T in agility. But I thought for purposes of this morning, we'd give you one example to see how the team thinks in an integrated fashion. New York City being our most important feeder market. The New York Times is certainly a premier media outlet that's not just in print today, but in digital as well. And it's a a medium that's not just consumed by New York City, but by the entire country and in some cases the world. So we worked on an integrated partnership with the New York Times, both in print and digital. And it's also an example of how we work in building the bridge, as we say, from off-island to on-island, and really thinking about Bermuda's brand and storytelling. So in T Magazine, which is a magazine that comes out seasonally within the New York Times Sunday section, we worked across the editorial themes that the New York Times and the T Magazine had. April was their culture issue as an example, and so we worked with profiling Bermudians in the cultural world to tell the story of Bermuda. And so this is the on-island to off-island approach. And then in digital, we worked with what they call Hello Society, which is a bank of influencers, and thinking about those target segments. We worked with bringing Destiny Green to Bermuda in April to look at active families. In May, we had Eric Conover as an adventure seeker. And then in June, we had Simply Sin or Cynthia Andrew come as an experience enthusiast. So each time those influencers came to Bermuda, they were posting in their own channels and sharing with their influential audiences. And then when they came back to New York, the New York Times team took that content and then created their own what they call a flex frame on NewYorkTimes.com, but then also in the New York Times social arena. So this is one buy, but the content that's created from this is going through multiple channels and hitting specific audiences. So hopefully that gives you just a little bit of insight about how the team is building partnerships and programs, and again, working to that on-island storytelling and off-island influencers being able to build that thread to their viewers and followers. Also this summer we worked on telling Bermuda stories, and Kimberly just mentioned the effort to attract more African American travelers in an aspirational way. So we actually worked on hosting a group of press and influencers around Cup Match. This is just one of several stories that came out of that, so not just the social media that was occurring while they were here in Bermuda for Cup Match, but Kirby Jean Raymond worked with Shiona Tarini, who worked with us on curating this group, and worked with amassing an amazing, influential group of Bermudians themselves who have stories of their own. And just if you had a chance to take a look at this piece, I highly recommend it. And if not, we can send it to you post this. But this is just one example of how we're building those deep and rich stories to build those connections that matter to travelers. Rosie also mentioned nurture markets, so I thought we'd use Atlanta as an example of one of our nurture markets. In this, we have digital advertising. In Atlanta, we work on integrated editorial, which is earned media. Tiffany and Jill recently did media calls where they were calling on CNN and other freelancers that were based in the Atlanta market. Earlston has been in Atlanta several times this year, working with educating travel trade professionals about the next generation of Bermuda. And then our sales team was also working on, with the University of Georgia. They do a big fundraiser every year, and it was Gardens of the World. And this year's theme was Bermuda, so we worked with them on that. And as a result of that, there was a garden club group that actually came to Bermuda and spent money throughout the island this spring. So just to give you a little glimpse into the visuals of this, because you can see words on a page or we can be up here talking, but I think a picture's worth 1,000 words, as they say. So this is an integrated partnership we did with Modern Luxury Publisher, and it was across 5 different magazines that they publish in markets that matter to us, but 2 of them were in nurture markets, Atlanta and then Orange County, California. So you can see here some cover exposure, but then when you get into the actual editorial and fashion feature, the color and the vibrancy of Bermuda really come through. And we were just really pleased with the motion and the delivery of this piece in particular.
Fantastic, thanks. Innovation. Glenn, how are we differentiating Bermuda's seasons through new experiences on offer outside of the summer? You and your team have been pretty busy recently, I know.
Yeah, I think one of the things that Vic's slides show is that our culture is one of the things that differentiates us. And in the slide she showed, that came through pretty strongly. So what we're trying to do is make those cultural experiences accessible to visitors when they come here. That is especially true outside of the summer. One of our stakeholders describes the summer as being loud, and during that loud time of festivals and celebrations and going to the beach, it might be difficult to make an argument about our art and architecture, for example. But in the fall and winter, it is perhaps easier to do that. So that's where we focus on those kinds of experiences. This month, we launched a whole litany of them that are art-related, Black heritage-related. Our homes and gardens are a part of the focus, which is really popular with some of our visitors. And then on top of that, we've tried to layer in wherever we can stories about food, because every traveler is really a food traveler now, and food represents a big part of our culture too. So you'll see us increasingly having food events at a cultural site. We call it food horizontally. Instead of thinking about food in a restaurant, where else can you put it? And that's what we're gonna do.
In your mouth.
Besides that.
You had a great picnic this weekend. Looking at your Instagram, I was kind of thought maybe you'd cloned yourself this weekend because you were everywhere.
That was a good example of it. So we had a luxury picnic for 46 people in partnership with the City of Hamilton and Etafel and Discovery Wines. And we did it at Bars Bay Park because there's a cultural heritage site there. There's a monument there that celebrates Black heritage. So those are the kinds of things that we're going to be working on in the future.
And you know, that's a good example of when we talk about differentiating the seasons instead of just pretending the summer is longer. The idea of alfresco dining is actually something that is more pleasant to do here in the fall
sure.
than it is in the summer. And traditionally, it's not something that we've drawn out to distinguish the fall. In fact, we kind of pretend it's nice to do year-round.
It's a really good point. I think the other point, too, is we're discovering that the best foods we have locally harvested also happen outside the summer. So how do we build experiences and stories around that? We've created a food harvest almanac for that purpose, so that when visitors arrive in the winter, they can look at this almanac and see what's available at that time of year and really request it when they go to the restaurants. And that is, of course, sustainable as well, because our local farmers are the ones who are growing it.
Great. Vic, I'm going to turn back to you just to talk about teams and groups. Your team has had some big wins over the past year on the sports strategy front. Can you highlight them and what we're achieving on a global scale?
Sure, happy to. The minister mentioned this morning that we have the first ever PGA Tour golf event coming to Bermuda the end of this month. So that's the Bermuda Championship. We've signed as the Bermuda Tourism Authority a 5-year deal, so we're guaranteed this event for the next 5 years minimally. I was just able to spend some time with other title sponsors and longtime sponsors at the PGA Tour Partner Summit just the last 48 hours. And it's amazing the stable of brands that they work with and how long those partnerships have been. But we have a whole sports tourism strategy that's part of the National Tourism Plan, and there are 4 core sports that we want to own in the vertical, and then there are some others that we want to really focus on in the horizontal and teams trainings. But one of those initiatives was to go out and find a pinnacle event for golf. And so we were very pleased to be able to enter into a slot that opened up on the PGA Tour calendar this year. So we only had 6 months to prepare for this event that's coming up the end of this month, but we have a full field and it's really exciting. It's going to garner Bermuda 4 days of 4 hours of daily coverage on the Golf Channel, which is unprecedented really. So just a great commercial for Bermuda, a great direct spending with 120 golfers plus their caddies plus sponsors coming in. the room nights that Golf Channel alone are consuming to come in and produce the TV coverage is impressive enough. So we're really excited about on the golf front.
And Vic, can you talk about, you keep emphasizing tour.
Yes.
Can you explain why the PGA Tour is different than what we've had here in Bermuda before?
Sure. So the PGA Grand Slam was an event produced by PGA of America, which is for the pros that are in golf clubs around the United States. And that event itself was aired on TNT during the weekday and brought 4 golfers, admittedly 4 of the top golfers in the world, but just from an economic impact standpoint, quite different. The PGA Tour is the Association for Tour Professionals, which that's the Tiger Woods of the world that are members of that. So quite different organizations, both worthy in their own right, but we access them differently. Second on that, in terms of the 4 sports verticals we want to own, another one is tennis. We certainly don't have the facilities to have the US Open or ATP finals here, for example, so we went out to build a partnership on the marketing front. And so we've entered into the first of a 3-year partnership with the US Tennis Association. So Bermuda was front and center at the US Open this fall in New York City, again, our top feeder market in the time of the calendar year that matters, going into the fall, extending your vacation days that Adam says that all Americans need to take, me being one of them. Can attest to that, but it's a really great partnership. And so this week, actually today, the USTA Tennis Channel and then the USTA Foundation are arriving to do a site visit in advance of their Pro-Am that they're bringing here in April of next year. So in that negotiation, we have front-forward marketing exposure for Bermuda, and also on-island spending with this event that they're producing specially for Bermuda that will then be taped while they're here. That's so old school language. But will be turned into a 1-hour package on the Tennis Channel. So again, thinking about how are we working on leveraging every single thing that we do. And then of course, one of the things about tennis and Bermuda is leveraging the story that Bermuda introduced the sport of tennis to the United States back in 1874. So that rooting in that brand story of Bermuda's relevance in that market is important to us. Endurance is another vertical, and so we have the MS Amlin World Triathlon Bermuda coming back in April of 2020. And then currently the Round the World Clipper Race is going around the world. And we have a team that's Go to Bermuda, so we have a boat branded that's going around the world that is Go to Bermuda. And then we will be a stopover in July of next year, so about 300 crew will be coming in on 11 boats, plus friends and family to celebrate them. So that's just a highlight of a lot of work that the team has put into these partnerships and all that it takes to activate around them and make them happen is really important. And that's not to mention the G in teams and groups, which we've really been focusing on executive retreats, looking at groups that really use the entire island like YPO. They're not just coming in and sitting in a conference room. They are doing meetings, but they're out exploring and engaging in experience in the island that are really memorable. So we've got a whole strategy that Hazel and Ishmael are going to take you through in the workshops coming up.
Great, thanks. Carla, I'm going to turn to you to talk about year-round tourism and just how we're using the visitor services centers to sell more experiences in every season. How are our teams doing that?
Well, they're doing wonderfully, I should say right off the bat. Bookings year over year of experiences are up 120%. We have a team of well-trained, knowledgeable tourism ambassadors. They use the guides that we have, that Glenn was talking about, all this information, all of these experiences that we have going on. Visitors want to know about it. So there's Go to Bermuda, we have our experience guides, but then they need someone to close the sale. And that's what they're doing in the visitor service centers, through an electronic booking platform, through quarterly information sessions that are run by the experience team, keeping them up to date. They're reaching out to stakeholders on a regular basis so that whatever's happening in the minute, they know about, and we're promoting it through the visitor service centers.
For those of you who haven't seen them, I think the Out Here guides are a really great example of where we've shifted our behavior to align with that year-round and 4 seasons rather than 1 season strategy. So these are now produced quarterly and try to really draw out what's special in each season about Bermuda. And I think one of the things that Glenn can attest to from running the experience investment process is that we've also realized that getting a new experience ready for a season is at least a 6-month runway. And so I think one of the things that's been challenging about adopting to this kind of cycle of producing new guides every quarter is we now have deadlines that many of you miss. Because actually, in order to get everything printed on island, everybody prepped about it, means it needs to be done well in advance. In order for you to be ready to market something through us means you need to actually really have your, I won't use the other S word, your stuff together, well ahead of time, which means I think one of the things that I know you've been experiencing is kind of people coming to you with great ideas. We're going to do this next month, and it's like, okay, maybe in 13 months.
Yeah, you missed our window. Well, I know Vic is going to talk a lot about those deadlines in the afternoon session, so I think what will help tremendously is that everybody's going to leave here today with a full year's worth of deadlines so that you can plan accordingly. And that's one of the reasons we changed the experience investment process to be twice per year instead of once per year, so that we can help target people a little bit better to our 4 seasons.
And I think it's important for everyone to know that the visitor services centers will be running a local outreach throughout the winter, so promoting winter experiences to the local community so they have an understanding. It's a perfect time for them to learn what's going on.
Erin, let's turn to airlift and metrics. Can you highlight a bit about where we stand on the efforts to grow capacity, to bring the people here to enjoy all these great experiences? What have been our wins to date, and how are we looking to improve?
Well, we're going to hear this afternoon in the airline outlook session about air service development strategy and sort of the big picture there. But in terms of wins for 2019 specifically, I think the United flight from Newark was a success in terms of starting a bit earlier than they had in previous years. It began service the end of April instead of June, which had been the case previously, and they had a pretty successful year. So that meant almost 6,000 extra seats flying into Bermuda from Newark. So that's an increase of 45%, and we were actually able to fill 45% more of those seats as well. So that's great news. And we hope to continue that in future years. The other one I would mention is the DCA flight for American. That one continued until September, until Labor Day this year, and previous years it had ended mid-August. So a few extra weeks, but I think it was successful for them also, so hopefully we can continue that. And in that market, that meant 1,500 more seats flying from DC this year, and 20% more seats that we were able to fill.
Excellent.
And then in terms of what we can improve, I would say this year was a bit of a reset for airlines in terms of capacity. They did some tweaking to their schedules to make sure that they're making the most money they can possibly make. So we did see a sizable hit to capacity out of JFK. And so I think in the future, through a sustainable air service development strategy, we'll just be looking to sort of mitigate those big fluctuations.
Vic, Carla mentioned the Out Here guides. How are we developing, I know you're going to do a deeper dive later on those, but how are we developing those in tandem with the content hubs to support this whole effort across seasons?
Sure. So I think maybe the shortest way to answer that, knowing we're going to get into it a little bit later today, is that we're thinking about everything that you are creating as our partners, what those experiences are, how they fit in that arc of seasons, and then also thinking about getting in the consumer's heart and mind. So when are they thinking about traveling? When are they dreaming about travel? When are they actually purchasing travel? And thinking about syncing that up so that when we're in collection mode with all of you in the room, that really needs to start about 180 days away from when that visitor arrives on island. And so part of what we're doing, and everything we do as a team is aspirational and improving our timelines as well, is that thinking about brainstorming what those experiences are by season, thinking about the content categories that are in the printed guide, but then while that is being researched, written, photography either taken or collected, is thinking about how to build that interactively on .com, because we can actually get that content on .com quicker than we can get it in a printed form. So we're aligning all of those production streams, which sounds really boring, but is really critical in terms of getting that those experiences out in people's hearts and minds when they're thinking about where to go and what they're planning. And that food culture thing that Glenn mentioned is something that's coming further forward. It used to be you were thinking about where you're going to go eat once you got to a destination. Those experiences are coming much further forward in the decision-making process for the consumer. So, we have folks that are doing, which lobster's best, local or Maine, from the Lauren. Cambridge Beaches is doing moonlight, full moon dinners. So the more creative you guys get, the better storytelling we have to put in the marketplace. So it really is the two-way street there that works best. But we're thinking about that from how we're going to execute that and tell that story in print, how we're going to do it in .com, how Tiffany and Jill and the team are going to take that and pitch that for earned media. So it really is a big hub that just goes in multiple channels, including social media.
Kevin, just one more comment on what we're calling balanced tourism before we move on to our second priority. Overall, how does it differ? How does this strategy differ from past national philosophies or approaches? And specifically, how are we balancing visitor volume between air and cruise?
So, I think the most significant shift we've already alluded to, which is to go from really thinking about Bermuda as having two seasons, the season and then the off season, and to put our collective effort into trying to stretch the season at its fringes into a much more seasonal strategy to say there are 4 distinct seasons and we should emphasize what's good about each of them, because the reasons to come to Bermuda in January are different than the reasons to come to Bermuda in July. And the reasons to come to Bermuda in October are different again. And so, we screw up when we say that the weather in October is like it is in summer, but we also screw up when we describe October as solely arts season and portray only pictures of things to do inside, because many days the beach is pretty spectacular. When it comes to air versus cruise, this was a debate that we got into last week. It's actually been a perennial debate. It's been either, it's air versus cruise, or I think Bermudian shorthand has been cruise is evil. And I think there are two things there. One is that we look at what's happening in Bermuda without appreciating what's happened in the rest of the world, which is that actually cruise has been rapidly outgrowing air travel, full stop. So the number of cruise travelers in the world has tripled since 2000. And so when we look at the Bermuda data and we don't like that, it's like, well, we are a little bit the victim of a global trend there. The other thing to emphasize is that what the National Tourism Plan appreciates is that it's not either or, but both. And that actually our cruise industry plays a really valuable role in Bermuda, both in that they pay a lot of taxes, and we actually upped that last year because we felt, and the government agreed, that it was unbalanced. And the other is that having more cruise visitors when we have capacity for them with our existing infrastructure, so having more cruise visitors in April and May and in October and November makes all of our tour operators, our experience providers, it makes all of their businesses viable more months of the year, which keeps more Bermudians employed, which also keeps those experiences available to visitors, which is good for them whether they came here by cruise or by air. So as Glenn and his team try to get more of you to operate more months of the year, more cruise visitors in April is good for that.
Thanks. Let's turn to our target audiences then. specifically, struggling with that one, must-win segments like experience enthusiast, adventure seeker, jet setter, and then, of course, the nurture segment, active family. Kevin, back to you. Can you recap why these 3 visitor segments are so critical for us?
So our experience enthusiasts and our adventure seekers really, and our jet setters are the 3 segments that have been powering our growth. So that dramatic comeback from 2014 or 15 that Adam Sachs showed you and I alluded to earlier has been powered primarily by those visitors. And those are the visitors where we think that Bermuda has the product that we can deliver on what their expectations are. What we recognize is that our adventure seekers and experience enthusiasts are becoming active families. So recognizing that an adventure seeker kind of gets a bit older, gets married, is a bit more self-indulgent, becomes an experience enthusiast. Then they have kids, and as those kids, the first couple of years, they may leave the kids at home and remain an experience enthusiast when they visit Bermuda. They're indulging and leaving the children with their grandparents. But once the kids are old enough to walk and they are independently mobile, they want to have family bonding trips. They want to go and create those lasting memories as a family. And so, if we're going to recreate Bermuda's success of the 50s and 60s in following a generation of travelers through their life stages, we need to make sure that we make the investments now in the product to satisfy the active family, because Bermuda is expensive for them. We don't have a lot of the hotel product they might be looking for. We don't have easy ways for them to get around. A Twizy or one of the cool little rugged rentals, Hummers, is a fantastic solution for an experienced enthusiast couple. It enables them to get out and be independently mobile in Bermuda. They can find Watson's Farm. They can explore on their own. Once they're a family of 4, they're kind of stuck. And so, over the next couple of years, we have to think about what change Bermuda is prepared to make if we really want to accommodate those visitors again.
Great. Glenn, let's just break down those segments a little bit more. For example, African American travelers are an important group. How are we creating ways and experiences to reach out to them?
Yeah, I get asked this question a lot. We look at the African American segment as sort of a subsegment of those ones that are bolded in number 2. And I always preface my response by saying it's not a winning strategy, really, to create experiences solely and specifically for Black travelers. The reason for that is because we don't really have that many of them. What we really need to do is create dynamic experiences that would appeal to Black audiences, but also to all audiences. And that's the way you make it sustainable. But there is an important element that comes with that sometimes gets overlooked. We find from talking to African Americans in focus groups and in other places, going to some place where they feel like they belong is really, really important. And telling stories about Black heritage in our community is one of the ways to send that signal. So we create these experiences because we want them to be dynamic and special and relevant to all travelers. But we think we get an edge because it does have that belonging feeling, specifically for African American travelers.
Absolutely. Okay. Vic, from your side of things, how does your work tie into that? And what kind of initiatives are we doing to attract African Americans, baby boomers, some of those niche segments?
Sure. Just building a bit off of what Glenn was mentioning, that L piece that I shared just a few minutes ago is a perfect example of that. We really put a lot of thought into who our partners were, what the experiences were, working with Shiona in curating that. Also curating the group. So not just going out and getting anyone, but getting the right mix of influencers. So there was influencers in fashion, there was one from museums, there was a nice blend of individual that was on that trip. But then, working with Jill as our magic maker here in Bermuda is thinking about how to create those experiences. And one of the phrases that's captured in that piece is, they never felt like they were looking through their experience through a white lens. And to me, that was really compelling, to how this, this island and the partners that we work with can really tell a story and build that. And I think Bermuda has that in ACES. And I think as our team is thinking about building the brand and building the stories of Bermuda, we oftentimes rely on the characters of Bermuda to help us bring that through. And that's the case of any of the audiences that we're talking about. That's just one example, but the experience enthusiasts, the outfitters that we have, the purveyors that we have, the adventure seekers, so being able to work with, you know, the catamaran cruises and, you know, a jet ski tour that, you know, for any consumer is going to be able to go off the beaten path, and even though a cliff jump was not on that tour, but to be able to deliver that. And you have to be able to think about how to put that story forward in a way that's intentional, but it's not hitting them over the head with it. And that is still something that we're working with currently. But in everything that we do, whether it's that partnership that with the New York Times, which is a mainstream media outlet, we're still thinking about how are we telling the story for that experience enthusiast that's going to connect, for that adventure seeker. And so again, how are we building those partnerships to be able to ensure that we're getting that emotional appeal and that what we call the pull to Bermuda.
Right. And I think, as you know, to your point, these need to be authentic, genuine experiences, which they are. I mean, I think as Bermudians,
100%.
Many of us have grown up in that way and had adventurous childhoods, and now to be able to share that with visitors makes sense. Let's move to making Bermuda easier to experience. Carla, how is our accessibility research and data being used to drive training initiatives like the Certified Tourism Ambassador Program, business engagement, education efforts? Can you talk a bit about that?
Well, yeah, I'll start at the back and then work the way forward and turn it over to Glenn, who's actually working with the accessibility working group. But from a raising awareness perspective and certified tourism ambassadors, we're actually completing a training module to go into that program. So to become a certified tourism ambassador, we're looking to raise your sensitivity about what accessibility actually means, because it does mean different things to different people. A lot of people will say, well, that means you have a mobility disability, and they don't think about the fact that even someone who has a stroller has accessibility issues. So it's all of the training that's behind how do we try to make our visitors more comfortable, advise them as to where they can go and where they have the easiest opening for whatever accessibility challenge they have. And that's going to take some time, but that should be included in our Certified Tourism Ambassador program starting the beginning of the year.
Great. Turning to empowering Bermudians to participate in the tourism economy, Kevin, local involvement, how are we, the BTA, taking a leadership role in helping prepare Bermudians for opportunities that are coming up, that are soon to be created by new properties on our island? Why is that so important too?
Mm-hmm. So when we sat here a year ago, we were, we can skip that one, there we go. When we were sitting here a year ago, I think we knew with new hotel properties coming online that there would be a need for new workers in hospitality and new opportunities for Bermudian entrepreneurs around that. But we weren't really able to get specific about what those opportunities were, which meant we then couldn't really tell people what they needed to do in order to get ready to take advantage of those. And we thought that was critically important. So government actually allocated us a specific grant related to hospitality needs and readiness. And we put the first bit of that money to work on actually really defining the opportunity. So we worked with PwC, and we worked with Bermuda's future hoteliers and our current hoteliers to look at where the Bermudian hospitality workforce was going and where the future need was. And what we actually learned was that the gap was bigger than we thought, because actually our hospitality workers are aging. So Bermuda has an aging workforce overall, but in particular because of the economic shifts that have happened in Bermuda over the last 40 years, actually the average hospitality worker, or Bermudian hospitality worker to be specific, is older than most. So when we look at the people that are likely to leave the workforce between now and 2022, and then we look at the number of Bermudians that are coming into the workforce, there's a really meaningful opportunity, and Carla will jump into what we're then doing with it, but I did want to encourage anyone who hasn't should read the hospitality needs assessment, the public version of which is just one page, but it tells you everything that you need to know about how big a gap we have to fill over the next couple of years. Carla?
Sure. So I'm really excited, as you'll see on this next slide, to talk about all the stakeholders that have come to the table to address that gap. So if you think of the hospitality industry workforce as a platform or a table, and it would have 4 supporting legs on it, these are them. There would be engagement, which is raising awareness, promoting the industry at all ages and stages. Setting the expectation. What is it, if you're coming into the industry, that is required of you? So that's pretty much a Bermuda service standard. Our visitors are expecting a certain delivery on the service, a certain quality of service delivery, irrespective of how much money they may be spending. Skill specific is position specific skills, whatever may be needed for that particular position you're in. And then employer specific really gets into, well, what is it that the employer wants? How would they like to see that skill? And I'll give you an example. So for instance, you might go to Bermuda College and you get a bartending certification, so you now know how to tend bar, but the way you're going to tend bar at a pub might be different than the way they're going to expect it, say, at the St. Regis. So that's where the employer specific comes in. So we're around the table. It involves both the restaurant community, the hotel community through the BHA, workforce development, Bermuda College and its PACE division, the BTA. There's some samples here of what falls under each of those legs. And what's going to tie them all together and allow us to communicate with those that are interested in these opportunities, both from a development perspective or a training perspective, and even looking for jobs, is a database that's now being created. It's being held by the Department of Workforce Development, so we encourage everyone to encourage others, themselves and others, to go to the jobboard.bm and fill in information. It's a short survey. It asks you about your age, any experience you have, what your education level is, and that enables us to begin to filter information out. So the agreement is that the database will sit there at Workforce Development. It's got all of its privacy locked down so that information won't be going anywhere else, but it allows all of the stakeholders to get information out to those who are in the database. So we're really excited about that. We're all around the table. There's a couple of great initiatives that are about to kick off, and the training for the whole preparation and workforce readiness will kick off in January.
Thank you. Erin, let's just move slightly to innovation in that vein. What tools are we giving industry stakeholders to stay connected and promote their businesses? Can you talk a little bit about some of the workshops? And I know some of them are featured outside the door there at the Brilliant Bars.
So we've held about 8 stakeholder sessions, workshops so far this year, with more scheduled, I think, between now and the end of the year, spearheaded by Rohan and Kristen on our team. We've had over 150 people. Some of you may have participated in those. If you haven't, I would encourage you to stop by the Brilliant Bars outside. The topics included BTA Connect, which is our stakeholder portal. So all stakeholders can get a login. They get access to specific information that's not available publicly, reports and things like that. You can also update your listings on our website, put special events up, update your photos, whatever you need to do for your listing particularly. And also there's a bulletin board where you can network with your peers. So that's BTA Connect. And then we also covered TripAdvisor, some how-tos on your TripAdvisor profile, as well as Google My Business. So I'd encourage everyone to see the Brilliant Bars outside.
Excellent, thanks. Let's just move last to our motivate stakeholders to engage and act on the National Tourism Plan. Over the lunch period, we're going to have someone from the regulatory authority here to talk about an exciting new green plan for Bermuda for the next 20 years. So we'll dive into that. Kevin, can you highlight just very briefly how we're evolving in this area?
So absolutely. So the National Tourism Plan, only about 20% of that plan is actually under the BTA's direct control. So, if the National Tourism Plan became just the BTA's plan, frankly, most of it won't get done. And when we look at the 2012 tourism plan that was put in place, actually, most of it didn't get done. And that was similar in the sense that it was a broad national plan, but it never really got engagement from people. So first Glenn and now you, Rose, are now tasked with making sure that the National Tourism Plan moves forward broadly with everyone's participation. And so that's where I think we alluded to the accessibility working group that's been set up. Actually, that's one of a number of working groups that have been set up this year with more to come that try to move some of these initiatives forward broadly. And I think when we think about the greener pillar in particular, that's one where the BTA's role is really that of an influencer and a cheerleader more than we are able to really independently drive that one on our own. So I'm really excited about some of the initiatives that I see coming out of Minister Robin and some of the initiatives that I see coming out of the private sector as well. I mean, who doesn't love Meredith Andrews' new supermarket shopping bags? Those are fantastic. And it's also a great example of where Bermuda, being such a small place, actually the private sector can achieve a seismic change and give us something that's newsworthy quite easily. We don't need government to outlaw plastic bags. We need the supermarkets and the Chamber of Commerce to just agree that they're gone. And then actually being the first island to eradicate them entirely is something that Vic and Tiff and Jill would be able to flog to the world media and get us earned media that you can't buy. And so, it's a great example of the kind of thing where we really want you guys to take the initiative and really take something forward.
Just wrapping up local involvement, then very briefly, Carla and then Glenn. Carla, the National Service Standards Program, where are we at with that, and how are we engaging folks and rewarding them?
Well, we'll be going into that in detail a little bit this afternoon. So National Service Standards is growing, and we're excited about that. And there'll be a full presentation on that. Certified Tourism Ambassadors always grow. We have the National Tourism Plan 101 as part of becoming a Certified Tourism Ambassador. And I do want to just quickly add to local involvement. We passed real quickly earlier Purple Tuesday, which is November 12th. And we're talking about accessibility. And that is actually an international day that recognizes accessibility around the world. So we will be kicking off the whole plan towards driving awareness on Purple Tuesday, which is November 12th.
Excellent. Glenn, again, just very briefly, Experience Investor Program. You have a second round coming up, is that right?
Yeah, this has been around since we started these summits, but the one way in which it's different now is that it's done twice per year as an application process, and that the sports process, which used to be part of the same, is now handled separately and is year-round. But to Kevin's point from earlier, you need to be, I think it's 6 to 8 months at least. In advance when you're submitting to that. But for the experience investment process, we do have a brilliant bar outside as well that Tashay and David are managing. That's where you can get all the details. But we just closed one for the fall, which is to represent mainly the first half of 2020. And then in the first quarter of 2020, we'll have another investment round for the second half of 2020, and then we'll keep that cadence going forward so that we're far enough in advance. And just one other issue that we've found over the course of the years is that oftentimes we'll find a really worthy applicant and then invest in them, but then they're stuck in the government regulatory part because their idea is too new, basically. So one of the things we're working on to help combat that is a speed networking seminar session where tourism entrepreneurs can actually meet face-to-face with some of the government regulators and other people in our community who are decision makers around tourism, so they can start the early work of figuring out what they need from them and and vice versa, so that we can actually get some of these ideas off the ground, which sometimes get stuck after.
I think you have a winner there.
Yeah, that's good. So more information about both of those things at the Brilliant Bar, which will be staffed all day.
And then just speed, you mentioned speed and speed networking. I'm going to just 10 seconds run through you. What's our wish list? Do you have a special something that you would like to achieve in the next 12 to 15 months? What would be a priority? Glenn, you want to start? Or?
Yes. Okay. I'm gonna call Adine Rattery Price, who I see here, and Minister De Silva, my fairy godmother and godfather, and ask for improved transport. And I know they care about that too, so I think we can get it done.
Erin, in that vein, sort of?
Yeah, I would say to have an agreed air service development strategy that all stakeholders buy into, and that is sustainable and gets funded if that's required.
Vic, what would you like to see?
Oh.
Top of the list.
You said fast. Okay, one of the things that we've been talking about is getting Bermuda in the cultural conversation. So as Adam shared this morning, and Kevin as well in his comments, we've come a long way, but by no stretch do we think we're done. We know that there's a long way to go to make Bermuda sustainable on a year-round basis for tourism and hospitality entrepreneurs. But part of a component of that we think is possible is with film and photo shoots. And currently we do not have a film incentive program. And that is something that we would like to explore. We've been doing a lot more work in that. We've been pitching Bermuda for TV, and we know what the obstacles are. So that is something that's going to be both private and public sector to get that right. But there's a lot of production that could be coming over on a 90-minute flight from New York that we're not getting currently. So that's something I'd like us to explore more than 12 to 15 months.
Carla, your top
I'd like to
wish?
see us put to bed once and for all the idea that service equals servitude, and that we re-engage our young Bermudians in all of the possibilities that are available in hospitality in Bermuda. And not only do we re-engage them, but that we train them so that when employers open their doors and say, I'm looking for people, they get people that are motivated, that are focused, that understand that there are opportunities there at whatever level they choose to be at, and that every single level is a great family sustaining position that they can take on and feel proud about in their own homeland.
Thank you.
This is so much fun. Can we just keep going with the wishes?
Kevin, you get the last word.
That's always a dangerous prospect.
And only one, not three.
Yeah, it's just whittling it down to one. Actually, I'll give you one that I think everybody in this room can be helpful with, and that is squarely beyond our control up here, which is I would really like people to be more thoughtful and positive about how they engage in social media. And so, one of the things I've noticed over the last year is people not appreciating how many visitors are on what you might call Bermuda-centric social media, as well as how many, including people in this room, seem to forget that they're speaking to visitors in visitor-centric forums. So, the next person in this room who, when asked by a visitor, what's the weather like in February, doesn't say it's great golf weather, and instead says it's cold. Is on my shit list. There you go, I got in there. But in all seriousness, I think we forget sometimes when we're being cynical and commenting on news stories that visitors are reading those, and we sometimes forget that actually for a visitor experiencing Bermuda in different seasons, it might be very different than for a Bermudian experiencing the most seasons. So I would just like people to be a bit more thoughtful.
Thank you. Thank you to our panel. And we're going to break now for 4 breakout sessions. I would encourage you to move your possessions because they're going to set the table for lunch. So take everything with you. We've got super yachts in Gardenia 1, frictionless travel Gardenia 2. Bravo is officially launching. Well done to them in Gardenia 3. That's the vacation rental group. And teams and groups are going to be where you had breakfast in Ponciana 1. Thank you.